We're looking forward to organize more online sessions and already have a few in mind coming months. Now, I know that everyone is everywhere from the world. I'm from Brunei in Southeast Asia, and I'm aware quite a bit of you is in Africa. So, I believe connection might be a bit bad sometimes, might be breaking up at certain time. So, it would help if you can switch off your video and just tune in, because with video, I believe it will take up more data. And also remember to mute yourself so we don't hear sounds of traffic. Okay, I'm gonna begin now and I'm gonna share my screen with you. Right, the subject today is managing the impacts of COVID-19 on construction projects. I hope everyone is doing well with their families and have taken the necessary precautions and steps during this difficult time with the COVID-19 pandemic. We hope you find this online session informative with valuable considerations to take in. So without further ado, let me have a brief introduction of myself. I'm Aaron Wong, a corporate member of the Institute of Surveyors, Engineers and Architects, in short PUJA, for Brunei. I'm also a member of Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, and I've been working in lab consultants in Brunei for more than 10 years. I've got my degree in quantity surveying and my master's in intelligent building from University of Reading, UK. I was chairman of Young QS for PUJA from 2012 to 2018. The chairman of Young QS for PAQS from 2016 to 2018, and is the current chairman for ICEC Rising Professionals from in 2018 in Sydney. Now, this is the contents of my presentation. A brief introduction of ICEC Rising Professionals, the situation of COVID-19 in Brunei. I'll keep it short. What are the impacts of COVID-19 on construction projects? What are the potential relief remedy? What are the considered construction projects? Along with a short conclusion to sum it up. Right, ICEC Rising Professionals was formed in ICEC PAQS 2018 in Sydney, where a proposal was presented to the council and approved, forming the inaugural committee members. It was agreed that the members of this group should be the relevant members of ICEC members and associate members, and must be the age of 40 and below, unless you are sitting on the senior advisory. We have a few activities planned, among others, such as ICEC RP Ghana Meet. The ICEC Ghana was scheduled October this year, but we are at the stage of uncertainty, so we will have to give an update soon as the council is making their decision whether to postpone or to go as planned. So in line with ICEC program, the main council, the rising professionals will be planning a gathering of a day or 2 or even 3 focused on the young members, where we share information and learn from each other, as well as understanding the host culture and traditions, often with site visits of local location of cultural interest and or case studies of construction developments. So apart from the meet, an annual newsletter is ongoing and should be out in the near future. We are also having a MentorNet program, and is bound to take off soon, where we take advantage of the widespread reach of the council in diverse practices around the globe. This program aims to help and support rising professionals in the formative years of their career, having an international view, as well as providing a platform for experienced seniors to give back to the professions. Right, and now here we have rising professionals' objectives. So their exchange of professional knowledge, aiding career development, learning different practices from all over the world, a networking platform to offer global communication and opportunities, and to promote ICEC to young members in ICEC members. So more often than not, we focus on face-to-face gatherings. Professionals and jump into the subject today. Managing the impact of COVID-19 on construction projects. I'll start off with the COVID situation in Brunei, compared to other countries, is not that notable. We have a total confirmed cases of 138, of which 120 has recovered, and there are only 17 cases which is active now, and there's over almost 2,000 people who has been quarantined. Okay, let's show the cases of COVID-19 according to the districts we have in Brunei. And this is also, we can see that the gap is narrowing between the red and teal, indicating that the cases are under control, and hopefully we can keep it this way. I hope that other countries around the world are faring same or better. These are the websites where the information will gather, and feel free to visit if you're interested. Now let's get into the impact of COVID-19 has on construction projects around the world. We can see that parties engaged in existing construction projects are increasingly issuing or receiving claims. For parties looking to embark on new construction projects in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, the impact of COVID-19 poses a number of different challenges for project execution. So what are the impacts? So number one is the performance on site. This is quite clear and apparent, as government guidelines to control the pandemic may implement social distancing and extra personal hygiene monitoring. Hence, workforce on site will need to get used to new standard of procedures as well as updated health, safety, and environment guides. So number of workforce working in a specific area will decrease, hence an adverse impact in performance. One of the largest impact would be a government directive to suspend all construction. This gives rise to increased costs associated with additional demobilization once work resumes. And of course, we have shortages of labor, which is a result of preventive measures to alleviate the outbreak spreading and or due to infection or potential infection and the resulting quarantine or self-isolation. Brunei uses a lot of general labor from other countries such as Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, and more. Hence, any restriction on the borders will result in a very direct impact in insufficient labor. Disruption in the supply chain and plant hire will bring delays in their importation or transportation, or the closure of plant hire companies or suppliers. Brunei has limited building resources with the exception of cement, bricks, aggregates, and a few more. Hence, heavily reliant on imports of other building materials from other countries, such as our neighbor Malaysia, China, Europe, and more. So factories' temporary closure will result in an unable to obtain the materials. Hence, projects are to look for alternatives from local companies with X stock, but for bespoke items, it is almost certain to be unavailable. Now, suppliers should also anticipate incurring additional costs resulting from acceleration measures that may be requested to make up for lost time once production resumes, which cost is to pass along to other contracting party. It is also possible that projects will encounter other indirect costs caused by the need to resequence portions of the work to account for supply chain disruptions and the cost of maintaining both idle workers and equipment during a work stoppage. So we have to take into consideration also the costs in protection of the works before resuming, and also the cost in rectification of these works. And number four, the fourth point is border closing. And this restricts imports and exports to a certain extent and have a huge impact, especially to the above two items, and especially to country heavily reliant on resources and products from other countries, such as Brunei. And delay or inability to obtain certain required permits is bound to happen during the time of fear and uncertainty. Depending on how the pandemic is handled by the country's government, whether it's under control, work sites are at risk of lockdown at any time. This may affect the performance of the workforce in its uncertainty period, as everyone is at fear of contracting the virus and whether their employment would be affected should a lockdown happen. Now, so after knowing the possible impacts, what are the potential relief and or remedy? Whether the COVID-19 pandemic amounts to any of the mentioned reliefs depend on the language of the contract. This is very important. Now, parties want to be careful when exchanging correspondence regarding COVID-19, so as not to inadvertently amend or waive contractual requirements. Failure to insist on contractual rights can be considered a waiver of those rights. That said, it may be appropriate and necessary to find a compromise proposition, without prejudice to either party's right to later re-examine any modified allocation of risks agreed on an interim basis. This is to keep a project moving forward in the near term. So let's have a look at these potential reliefs. I'll focus more on force majeure, as I believe this is the strongest support for relief in most cases. So what is force majeure? Force majeure, at its simplest, can be described as matters that are outside the control of the parties, which could not reasonably have been foreseen at the time of the contract being entered into, and whose effects prevent performance of the contract. Now, how is force majeure defined in the contract? Different construction contracts deal with force majeure in different ways, and there's no general principle of force majeure in English law. It is important that you check the exact wording of the contract, including whether the parties have chosen to define what constitutes a force majeure event. A force majeure clause usually excuses a delayed party from meeting its scheduled obligations to an extent affected by the force. Now, some contracts are completely silent on force majeure, but silence will not automatically mean that there's no force majeure rights. The context of the entire contract may support a claim where no express right to relief is written, but implied rights will be at best be limited. Now, prudent parties will therefore want to take all reasonable steps to complete their obligations, even in the face of increased inconvenience and additional costs. Some contracts do not define the events that constitute force majeure and instead rely on general accepted definition of the term, including the concept of act of God. Force majeure clauses tend to traditionally deal with events such as fire, floods, terrorist acts, war, contamination by radiation, and usually include acts of God. Some may include plague. Thus, it is very important to what extent is force majeure defined or explained in detail in the contract. It should be possible to claim the existence of a force majeure if the objective criteria in the definition are actually met. So what are these criteria? It typically requires that the event be beyond the reasonable control of the affected party, and that the event actually impede or delay performance by the affected party. Some clauses even go further and require that the event not have been foreseeable by the affected party when it entered into the contract. The affected party typically has the burden to demonstrate that the event meets the applicable definition and the other criteria set out in the contract. So it will be very important to review whether the alleged force majeure has actually impacted the party claiming relief. The constant stream of news may contribute to fear uncertainty, but may not always be reasonable grounds for shutting down a construction site, especially where a contractor may take reasonable measures to mitigate employee concerns and keep construction going on. So, were the reasonable measures to mitigate taken? Force majeure events often result in time, but not financial relief. Other provisions of the contract may, however, give rise to an entitlement to cost relief. Examples include change in law provisions where countries enact emergency legislations that affects performance of contracts that give rise not only to time relief but also cost relief. This will come under the next slide. So in all circumstances, it's important that we comply with any time limits for notification of claims, as there is the possibility that a failure to comply with them may nullify a claim, if they are construed as conditions precedent to such claims. The clause must also be analyzed to establish whether or other restrictions are placed on relief. For example, Location of event occurrence, whether it has to be project country or will it cover delays caused by the supply chain interruption, say from China, Europe, or any other places. To note, it may be a different story for contracts entered into after the outbreak or after it became foreseeable that the outbreak could potentially reach the project's country location. That is to say, in those circumstances, the requirement where the event is reasonably unforeseeable is unlikely to be met, meaning that we are aware of the pandemic at the moment, so getting into a contract with the existing clauses may not be sufficient because the event has already occurred. So disputes arising as to whether or not COVID-19 was foreseeable at a given time will surely happen. And we move on to the change in law. Contractor. So this has to depend on the circumstances and the terms of the contract. The effect of the COVID-19 may allow a party to invoke different rights to relief and compensation. For example, as governments begin ordering protective measures that go beyond voluntary social distancing, contractors may become unable to maintain previous levels of site activity. Such mandatory restrictions could trigger the change in law provision of a contract, typically entitling the contractor to both schedule and cost relief. So consider whether a change in law provision in your contract is another potential remedy in the event that a government order makes contract performance impracticable or impossible. So example of such is adjustment in price, adjustment in time, and perhaps termination of the contract. COVID-19 has resulted in numerous governmental laws, orders, and regulations, many of which may impact contract performance. And your contract may provide an additional basis of relief in such a scenario. So do have a look at the provisions in the contract. Law that is analyzed. If the contractor is only entitled to relief where the suspension is directed by the principal, this may not entitle the contractor to relief, where, for example, a COVID-19 outbreak. If the contractor is entitled to suspend for health and safety reasons which are not caused by the contractor's breach, then this may entitle the contractor to suspend and claim relief. Where a contract entitled the contractor to relief where suspension is required by law or by order of an authority, the contractor may be entitled to relief if a site shut down by order of the government authorities, depending on the nature of the suspension or shut down by order of the government authorities. So the drafting of suspensions of all construction work. Hence, there is an increased likelihood of suspension events arising through the fault of neither party to the construction contract. And we have termination. So certain contracts allow either party to terminate the contract if performance is prevented due to force majeure for a certain number of consecutive days or a certain number of non-consecutive days. The relevant clauses are often referred to as allowing termination due to extended force majeure. It may require that all of substantially all patients be affected by force majeure for the specified duration before either party may terminate the contract. The implied strategy is that both parties agree to share the cost of the unanticipated delay up to a limit. So imagine if there's no limit, then the cost will keep overrunning. And that's simply unacceptable to either parties. One would not simply just pay for the cost overrun, and another one would not allow to happen if his interest of the cash flow is not secured. Where the contract provides that the contractor will receive no cost relief in connection with a force majeure, negotiate an acceptable. And we have frustration here. I see I'm a bit over time, so I try to move along as quickly as possible. So one final consideration is that parties may also claim that their construction contract has been frustrated by the impact of COVID-19. A contract is frustrated when an unforeseen event out of the control of either party renders the contract incapable of being performed or renders the obligations under the contract radically different from those contemplated by the parties. For instance, this may occur if a change in law renders likely clauses implicated by COVID-19. So what relief is one entitled to under this clause? What does one need to do to preserve your rights to claim such relief in terms of notice and other documentations? So you must understand your rights and your obligations. And the next step is to identify and document the impacts. What delays are the project facing? How are the vendors and suppliers affected? How will that impact the project down the road? And what notices should be given to the project team, if any? And then a plan must be formulated. All parties have a legal duty to mitigate COVID-19. Identify these impacts and the steps the project team can take to lessen their effect. Are there other scope of work under the contract any party could be performing despite all the governmental shutdowns? It is important the project team maintain communication and monitor updates to legislation and other governmental orders which continue to change. And notify to inform is a crucial in taking a position. So formal notices and other written and verbal communications among the parties should be precise, factual, and without emotions of hyperbole. The point is to inform while also satisfying technical notice requirements. Inform the actions to be carried out in the foreseeable future under the current predicted circumstances. This is my last slide, and I'll try to go through quickly. So we look into the considerations for future construction projects. We see contracts and why is because the protection of major coefficient currently mainable anymore to foreseeability because it has happened and everyone is aware of. So we have to consider how new contracts are to be drafted and that's a wish to add COVID-19 outbreak. These new requirements are likely to have impact costs. And of course, supply chain management. And given recent travel restrictions and general uncertainty around travel globally, contractors, particularly international contractors, may want to consider employing more local manpower so that they would be less susceptible to any disruption due to COVID-19. And also we have insurances. Now would be a good time to review insurance policies so we are clear on our position. So review insurances for projects, review insurances for the workforce, whether they are covered. To ensure the risks are allocated sufficiently, this will inevitably result in higher costs, but required nonetheless. So most contracts do not mention circumstances covering internationally. So this may be something which has not been considered. The exact wording of each policy may need to be scrutinized to try to identify where risks lie. And coming to conclusion, I would like to remind understanding the contract clauses and the project status so that we can know the extent of the impact the COVID-19 in pandemic has, and that will help in justifying the claims put forward, if any. So this is also an opportunity for us to one in the construction industry right now is likely to come out of the current restrictions unscattered. So all parties should be working together to find a commercial solution, which may be beyond the terms of the contract, to deal with the inevitable disruption that this may cause, and to document any such commercial agreements as clearly and timeously as possible. Thank you. Okay, so I end my presentation there. Should I pass on?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman, ICCC Rising Professional, for the wonderful